So, it is really a beautiful moment and a divine opportunity that on this special day when we are celebrating Gurudev's birth centenary and combined with the Punyatithi Mahasamadhi day of Gurudev, and it is really a blessings of God and lineage of our masters to be in the presence of our beloved and adorable Roy Eugene Davis Baba. In spite of his busy schedule and his own dedicated service for the cause of Kriya Yoga, so he's here. When I was young, I saw few disciples of Sri Yukteswarji. When I looked at them, I was feeling so much of love for Sri Yukteswarji through them. A tree is known by the fruit. Similarly, coming to this country, because to find so many direct disciples of Paramahamsa Yoganandaji in India is not so easy, as he spent most of his active part of life as predestined or as a divine mission here in this country mostly. Similarly, when I met or saw or I was in the company of some direct disciples of Paramahamsa Yoganandaji, I always feel that he's reflected through his beautiful disciples. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa said, from soft clay you can make many earthenwares. If it is not soft, it is not possible to make good utensils, pots. From young age, when one's mind is drawn towards divinity or spirituality, it is a rare opportunity that happened in the life of Roy Eugene Baba. Troubles and difficulties opened the eyes, and whatever challenges he had to meet in his teenage brought him closer to God and bringing at the feet of Paramahamsa Yoganandaji. I'll not take too much of time. I'll request Baba to speak.
Just for a few minutes. All right.
If they have some, you can speak little, and if they have any question,
yes,
they can ask.
Do that.
Okay.
Good morning, one and all. It's a pleasure to once again be here at the ashram. And as Clifford and his wife and I were driving in, I noticed changes that have occurred here on the grounds in the last few years. So everything looks very nice. As was mentioned by Swamiji, I had the good fortune to meet Paramahamsa Yogananda when I was 18 years of age. I had read 2 books on Hatha Yoga during my high school years, but when I read Autobiography of a Yogi and saw the photographs of Laramashai, Sri Yukteswar and Master, and the artist's portrait of Mahavatar Babaji, I felt an instant connection. I enjoyed reading about the other saints and seeing the photographs of other saints, but those portrayals of our Guru lineage were the ones that attracted me. And I knew then that the Kriya Yoga was my path. And so after high school, I grew up in Ohio on a farm. And after high school, I went to Los Angeles, California, and I met Master 2 days before Christmas. In 1949, I hitchhiked from Florida. In fact, I had come down from Ohio with the misguided idea that I should come down to Florida and work and make some money and then go to California. But not being successful at making money in Florida, after several weeks I hitchhiked from Florida to California, which I don't recommend anyone do now. But it was as though there was a hand guiding me every step of the way. And I arrived in Los Angeles at the SRF headquarters about 6 in the evening. And after 7 days on the road, it was a timely arrival because dinner was being served in the men's kitchen, and I was invited to join them. And then one of the monks took me up to the ground floor level to talk with me, to ask the usual questions. Why are you here? And how did you hear about self-realization, fellowship, and so on? And as we were talking, Master came into the room on the way out to his car. And he shook my hand, and I would like to be able to say that he said, I have been looking for you, waiting for you. But he didn't. And he shook my hand, and he asked, how old are you? And I said, I'm 18, sir. And he said, well then, do your parents know you're here? And I said, it's all right. So he said, all right. And he put his hand on my forehead for a moment, and he said, I'll see you again. And went out to his car. So that was my beginning with him. And I was with him for a little over 2 years because he passed in March of 1952. And I was at the Self-Realization Fellowship headquarters for about 2 months, fitting into the daily schedule with the other male monastics, having the opportunity to see Master a few times a week. So when he came out on the grounds or coming and going to his car, he would stop and talk with us. And then he sent me to Phoenix, Arizona to assist with a organizational project there. And there was only one other monk there. It's the minister in charge of the branch center in Phoenix. And that was one of the greatest blessings that he sent me there. Because while participation with the group of monks was all right, and it was the first 2 months was an opportunity to get into a routine of meditation and work. I found that in Phoenix that I had privacy. And the monk who was there was a good role model, and he assigned me my work assignments, and then, except for once a week when we would talk about what needed to be done on the grounds or in the building, he had his duties, I had mine. And so I could live completely secluded and focused on my purpose for being there. And so I arranged my own schedule of meditation. I would meditate every morning from about 3 to about 6:30 or 7. And then about 30 minutes at noon, I would practice mantra. And in the evening, from about 7 to 9, or to 9, sometimes 10, I would meditate again. And I would use the various techniques that I had learned from Master, the mantra and Om contemplation, Kriya pranayama. And I had not yet been initiated into Kriya pranayama. But I soon found that shortly after I arrived, that Master expected everyone who lived there to know and practice the Kriya procedures. And so he would, sometimes he would have one of the senior monastics teach the new arrivals and then later formally initiate the disciple. Or also in just being with the other fellows and also listening to Master talk during informal gatherings about meditation practices, you could easily pick up the processes without being formally initiated. But it was a great blessing that he sent me over to Arizona because I had that private time, seclusion. And but when he sent me, he said, come back to see me every 60 days. So every 60 days I returned to California to have several days private time with him. And it was usually out at his desert retreat in 29 Palms, where he had a small house. And he had gone there during the last 3 or 4 years of his earth life to be in seclusion, to finish his writing commentary on the Bhagavad Gita and other scriptures, and to give the people to whom he had assigned the responsibility of carrying on the work, giving them the opportunity to make decisions without him being too readily available. And so I had private time with him there. Then I would go back to Phoenix. And I was initiated in August of 1950. And the occasion was a group gathering of resident disciples and some members of the organization in the Los Angeles area who gathered at the headquarters. And Master conducted the initiation, and then afterwards everyone that came by in a line, and he touched them on the spiritual eye. And I remember when he did it, he said, at one time while he was doing this, he said, I am sending light into your body, I'm giving you everything, and you have to be ready to receive it. And then after the Kriya service, when most of the folks had gone, I stayed behind with some of the monks, and we were putting the wooden folding chairs away, because we had brought extra chairs into the chapel for the occasion. And Master was still sitting there up front, in front of the altar, and comfortable. He was happy. It had been a wonderful event, a wonderful occasion. And I was close to him, about this close, collecting a chair, and I caught his eye. He looked at me, and I caught his eye, and he could see that I wanted to say something, so he motioned for me to come. And I went over to him, and I said, will you show me the spiritual light, will you show me the inner light? Because during the course of his preliminary talk, before giving instruction in meditation practice, he mentioned that he was so happy to have so many people gathered on that occasion. And he compared it to his early days in Boston in the early 1920s, when perhaps he would have 25 or 30 at a class. And he said during that time, he said, I had more time to work individually with each person and show them the inner light. And I heard him say that. So after everyone had gone, and I asked him if he would show me the inner light. And so he said he didn't, there was no discussion. He simply said, well, kneel down. And that was so he could put his hands in my forehead. And he said, look into the spiritual eye. And I looked, and I saw immediately 2 lights. They were like half moons, brilliant against a dark background. And they started to come together. And when they almost merged, someone off to one side made a noise with the chair that he was folding, and it distracted my attention, and the light dispersed. And the moment that happened, and there was no conversation going between us, so I didn't tell him what I was seeing. And when that happened, he took his hands down, and he said, let's wait a moment and do it again. And this time, when the lights almost came together, he said, now look into the distance. And so I steadied my gaze, and I saw this brilliant ball of light. And then he took his hands down, and he said, what you saw was Krishna and Radha, spirit and nature. And whenever you look like that, meaning look in that manner, you can see that light. And of course, I found when I was meditating on my own, it was not always easy to look like that, to see the light quite so easily. But I remember his touch. Was able to do that. He could do that with others too who were receptive. Just his touch and his intention. And he could look in here in his own spiritual eye, and he could see what the what the devotee was seeing. That's how he could guide them and direct them. And it was only less than 2 months after I was with him that I began to experience occasions of spontaneous arousal of energies in the spine. And especially when I meditated, but sometimes during the day, it would just happen spontaneously. And Master never discussed this, and he never talked about it publicly. I never heard him talk about Shaktipat. But I noticed that with me and with others in whom this life force was becoming active, that when he was with us in informal gatherings, he would watch us very carefully. He would look at us very intently and keep an eye on us. And now and then he would smile and he would say, "You're doing well. I'm very pleased." But there was never any discussion about it, but he kept track of us that way. So I was fortunate to have those early experiences with him like that. And then, of course, in March of '52, he passed. He was at a banquet that was arranged in honor of Ambassador Sen, India's ambassador at that time to America, and who was in Los Angeles. Master had hosted him, prepared a dinner for him and his wife and his entourage at SRF headquarters 2 or 3 evenings before the banquet. But the Indian Society of Southern California had arranged a public event at the Ambassador Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, and they invited Master to be one of the people to sit at the head table. And so he went, and he talked. About 9:30 that evening, when dinner was over and people were giving little short talks. And he gave a very short talk, and then he quoted a few lines from one of his poems, Mother India. And with the final words, "I am hallowed, my body touched that sacred sod," he lifted his eyes and slumped to the floor and was gone. And so the minister, who was the senior minister at the Phoenix Church, with whom I worked, was at the banquet and on that Friday night. And he called me at the Phoenix Center. It was 10:30, phone call came in. And he told me what had happened. And he said to me, he said, "I've talked with Faye Wright." Faye Wright is now Sister Dayamata, president of SRF. "Talk with Faye, and you are to call the members in Phoenix and have them gather on Sunday night and perform a memorial service for Master, and then come over here for the funeral service." And so I did, and so I performed the first memorial service for Master. And it was at the Phoenix SRF Center, a very small group of members gathered. Then I went over to Los Angeles, and I went upstairs to his room where his body was on the bed, lying in state. And devotees were coming and going. And there was a sadness and a sense of loss, so you could feel among many of the devotees and disciples. And I felt that too, but it wasn't overwhelming, and because Master had taught me more, better than that. We loved the Guru, Guru's physical presence and form, and but we know that the Guru is, as Master used to say of himself, "I am not the Guru, God is the Guru, and I am only God's servant." And so his body was there, but there was no diminishment of attunement with his spirit and with the consciousness of the Guru line and the energy of the Guru line. It was there. And so I was aware of that. But so after the funeral service, the day after the funeral service, Sister Dayamata, who was then the executive secretary for the organization, called me into her office and told me that it was Master's wish that I be the minister at the Phoenix Center, and they were recalling the minister who was there back to California. Master had ordained me in the autumn of 1951, and it was a spontaneous a moment. I was visiting there on one of my regular 60-day interval visits. But this time it happened to be at the SRF headquarters. I think it was right after Thanksgiving. And the night before I was to go back to Phoenix, he asked me and one of the other monks to go upstairs with him to the top level of the building. And he sat in a chair in the hallway and talked to the other monk for a while about certain matters. And then he turned to me. I was standing just to his left side. And he said, "Kneel down." And I knelt, and he put his hands on my head. And he said, "I ordain you a minister of self-realization. Heal as I have healed, teach as I have taught, heal as I have healed, and initiate devotees of God into Kriya Yoga." And the monk who was observing this was surprised at his words and said, "Sir, is Roy to initiate people?" And Master said, "You too. The same God who is in me is in you. And what I have done, you should do." Of course, I wasn't ready to initiate at that time. Master was preparing me for the future. I had some learning and growing to do. I was only 20 years old at the time. I'd only been there 2 years. So, but it was an understanding without having to be verbalized that this was consent. But then it would be later before I would be able to do that. So that's how it happened. It's just spontaneous, and that transmission of authority to represent the Guru line. And so I have been doing this ever since. And now, these many years, 56 years, going on 56 years. And I've never deviated from the path. And many who have known me over the years know that I've always been consistent in presenting the Kriya Yoga teachings in a straight, practical, honest way. Because, as you know, as initiates and devotees on this path, this way is very practical. When I first read about the philosophical principles of yoga when I was about 16 or 17, I thought, this is true. Because I was not asked to believe anything, but the offering was, here are the facts of life. If you think like this and do these things, you're going to have these results. You can experiment and find out whether or not these teachings are true. So that appealed to me very much. And I have a devotional nature, but I'm also discerning and thankfully intuitive. But so this path it's real. If we do what we are supposed to do and discipline our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors and see through the illusional sense of self called the ego, then very quickly we can be awake to the truth of what we are as units of pure consciousness. I remember, I mentioned earlier, it was a blessing for me, I feel, that Master sent me to Phoenix to be alone in my spiritual practice, except for contact with him. Because I remember occasionally I would visit the headquarters and sometimes hear the other monks talking, and they were nice fellows. But they would spend, some of them, not all, but some would spend their time in useless talk. "Oh, do you think it's possible to be enlightened in this incarnation?" "Oh, I don't know. I have a lot of karma. Maybe it'll take several incarnations." And so on and on. The most I can hope for is that next time I'll come back early in life and get a better start early, and then maybe I can do it. And I didn't want to hear that talk at all. And because when I first read about the ideal of liberation of consciousness, spiritual enlightenment and liberation of consciousness, when I was a teenager, my impulse was, I can be like that. I want to be like that. I can be like that. And so I never wanted to hear, even in the early years, any talk to the contrary. And of course, Master occasionally reminded disciples, don't poison each other's minds with funny ideas and nonsense, you know. But sometimes people will talk. So I've always been focused. Sri Yukteswar, Paramahamsa Yogananda's guru and guru of Paramahamsa Hariharanandaji, Sri Yukteswar, he used to tell his disciples, the boat that carries devotees across the river of delusion to the far shore of freedom in God, is ready to depart. Who will go? Who will go? If no one goes, I will go. And he would say, be like that. And Sri Yukteswar, I'm sure you have heard stories from your master. Sri Yukteswar was a disciplinarian. And Yogananda told us, the disciples one time, he said, it was very difficult, he said, for me, Yogananda, he said, the first 2 years of Sri Yukteswar, because he was so strict. Because you know from reading Yogananda's book, Autobiography of a Yogi, when Master was very young, he was impulsive and devotional. But Yukteswar was strict. But Master said, I needed that training to balance my personality. And he said he couldn't get rid of me. But Yukteswar was very, very, very strict. Sometimes Master said he would go rest early in the evening and then meditate maybe 10, 11 o'clock at night until dawn. And now and then he would make the rounds of the ashram and look into the private rooms of the disciples, male disciples, to see if they were meditating. And if they weren't, sometimes he would grin and tug on their ear and say, wake up, do you want to sleep your life away? So he was setting the example. But there's something that is not understood by people who are not initiated or not perceptive, don't have insight into the yogic procedures, is that there is a power that flows through the Guru lineage. And whenever I would visit Master in California, he would almost always tell me, before I left to go back to Phoenix, he would almost always say, stay in tune with me, because when you are in tune with me, I can help you. And when you're not in tune, then it is difficult. It's like having static in the mental radio. So stay in tune with me. And I found that when I was in Phoenix, 300 and 400 miles away from Los Angeles, that when I thought of him and the Gurus with love and respect, I had the same feeling that I had when I was with him. It was like they were there. There was a presence. I could feel the presence and the support. And Master, in the early years, 2 years, he never asked me about my meditation practice routine. Now and then when I visited him, he would say, how do you do Jyoti Mudra, or how do you do Kriya Pranayama? And then he would give me some pointers. He would say, that's good, or else he would say, do it this way. But he never asked specifically, how long do you meditate, and in what sequence do you practice the techniques? He never asked. But he didn't have to. I found out, because he could know, just by thinking of us. He said, I go through your souls every day. He used to say that of the disciples sometimes, I go through your souls every day. And then now and then I would visit him, and when I would, of course I always made sure I was in good shape when I went. And when I would go, sometimes when I would first arrive, he would turn to Dayamata or one of the others, and he would say, oh, look how well Roy is doing. Then he would say, whatever you're doing, keep it up. But he never asked specifically, what are you doing? But he knew I was self-motivated. I mean, from the core of my being, not ego-directed, but self-motivated. I've never needed anyone to tell me you can do it, or to cheer me up, or to cheer me on. I've never needed that. I've always been strongly self-motivated and had the ability to make right choices and to be determined. So, but there is that power that flows through the Guru lineage. And of course it is transmitted, it can be transmitted at the time of initiation too. But that makes the difference between just having a teacher who provides information and on the other hand being connected spiritually, mentally and spiritually with a lineage of gurus through whom this power flows. Of course it comes from the source, and any guru will say that they are only a conduit. The word channel is not a good word today in some circles, within the way he's channeling and so forth. But a conduit, an instrument through which the power flows. And it is personal when in contact with the teacher, but it is impersonal also. It is impersonal. It is just there. And it's accessible to everyone. And Master used to constantly remind the disciples, you have to make yourself receptive to it. If you can be receptive to it, you can have it. And so that's the part that's our part, to make ourselves receptive to it. And then when it begins to express through us, and then in our spiritual awakening and our progress on the path is spontaneous. In the Kriya tradition, according to Patanjali Yoga Sutra, when the restrictions are removed, then the light of the soul is self-revealed. The innate qualities and capacities are unveiled and naturally unfold. So it's not that we have to work hard to become something, it is mainly we are getting rid of the stuff that gets in the way of spontaneous spiritual awakening and the unfoldment of our innate capacities and qualities. We have the potential. According to Patanjali and the great masters, we have the potential to express excellence and to use extraordinary powers of perception and exceptional abilities, functional abilities. But so our capacities are virtually unlimited. Virtually unlimited. But as I mentioned last night at the group gathering in Fort Lauderdale, I think that it is important that we always keep before us in our inner mind, inner vision, what our ultimate aim in life is. While we are here, we have duties to perform, we have things to do, lessons to learn, of course, but a service to render. But the ultimate aim is to be fully awake, to be liberated. And I think anyone who aspires to be fully awake and who can surrender what needs to be surrendered or let go, to allow the innate inclination, to have their awareness completely restored to wholeness, can be liberated in the present incarnation. Not to wait until drawing the last breath. I received an email from someone several months ago who asked, how can I be assured that I will be liberated when I leave this world? And the only answer I could provide then, and even now, was the only way you can be assured that you're going to be liberated when you leave this world is to be liberated before you leave it. So that makes sense, doesn't it? Get the job done. And not, rather than, I hope I make it. I hope when I go I'll see the light and the masters will be there. No, my thought is we want to be fully awake long before then. Then the question comes, what will I do then? I won't have anything more to do. Oh yes, you have work to do. After you are liberated, you can continue to serve. You can help others wake up. That's useful. The Master used to say, while you are learning to swim, you're going to help others to swim. But also, when you are liberated, then you have nothing more to do on your own behalf, but then you are completely free to assist others who are capable of being helped. You are free to help others be awake. And that is a great blessing opportunity to be able to do that, to show others the way to their spiritual awakening, their liberation of consciousness. So, I thank you for the opportunity of being here with you, and I enjoy being with you. We are all spiritual family in the same Kriya tradition, and I think it's good that we acknowledge that, and we have the opportunity to share from time to time on a personal level in this manner. Thanks so much. If there are any questions or inquiries, yes.
Could you share, if you may, your experience of our Divine Guru Baba, your meeting?
Pardon?
Could you share a little bit of your meeting with our Divine Guru Baba?
With
Hariharanandaji?
Yes, in 2002, I had been aware of Baba's activities for several years, but I had never met him. And in 2002, I was scheduled to present a meditation seminar in Fort Lauderdale at a hotel function room. And the thought came to my mind. I'd heard that Baba was here in residence. So I contacted someone here at the ashram and asked if I could visit him, and that permission was given. And so I came down 2 days early before my scheduled event. And Clifford, where did Clifford go? He's outside. Clifford drove me down, and Baba was in his bedroom and lying down resting. He wasn't under the covers, he had his robe, but he was just resting. And he was very quiet, and so we just talked only a few minutes, and just pleasant talk, and then he just reclined there with his eyes open in a very peaceful state, and then I held his hand for a while. And those who were there, were any of you here at the time? Those who were there were sitting on the floor around the foot of the bed. And then after a while I took my leave, and that was our short visit. It was very peaceful, very calm. And so I was glad to have come and to have visited him. Paramahamsa Yogananda is my spiritual father, and Paramahamsa Hariharanandaji is the brother of Yogananda, so that makes him my spiritual uncle. So it was nice. It was nice to see him then, and of course several months later he passed. So I'm very glad it happened that way. I was able to see him and to pay my respects and to make that contact. Yes?
Can you please describe the experience you had when we observed Paramahamsa Yoganandaji in Mahasamadhi?
What is this?
When Paramahamsa Yoganandaji went to Mahasamadhi state, I wanted to get your experience, what you felt.
When Swami Yogananda experienced Mahasamadhi,
Not in the final Mahasamadhi, I'm talking about
I don't, what does he say?
In Samadhi state. Okay, he's telling your experience if you have when you saw Yoganandaji in deep meditation or in Samadhi.
When I saw Yogananda in Samadhi, of course, we would gather with him to meditate on special occasions, Christmas, Thanksgiving, his birthday. The monks and the sisters of the order, the renunciate disciples, would gather and meditate with him. And when he meditated, he was so deeply absorbed that if you opened your eyes and looked at him, you saw that he was completely absorbed. He was not body conscious. But my perception of him was that he was always in a superconscious state, even when he was not meditating. And so that was a sahaja samadhi, a spontaneous oneness consciousness all the time. Even he didn't have to be immobilized and physically still with breath stopped and so forth to be established in samadhi. But I never saw him when he wasn't in a God-conscious state, even when he was interacting and so on. He once told a small group of us, just not in a quiet way, he said, I banished Yogananda long ago. Only God dwells here now. That was in his last years. When he was more absolute, I remember one monk telling the story that a year or two before Master passed, he was asking metaphysical, philosophical questions. And Master said, don't bother me with such questions now. These days I am more absolute and not inclined to discuss such matters. So he was already withdrawing and pulling away. And so the last 2 years when I was with him, I noticed that he was always appropriate, and when talking with you, good communication and very attentive, very caring, very supportive, but there was that aura of aloofness about him too, of otherworldliness, like he was in two worlds simultaneously. And perhaps your Baba was like that in the later years. But there was a transcendental quality about it, a characteristic about him. That's why I mentioned last night that when I went to see him, I went to be in his presence for darshan. I went to be in his presence, to experience his consciousness, rather than to go and ask a lot of philosophical questions. I could get those answers out of books, you know. And I didn't have any personal problems. So I went just to be with him. And I watched him very carefully. And endeavored to be in tune with him. He used to say in private conversations with small groups of monks, he would say, when I'm here with you like this, he said, tune in, connect your spiritual eye with mine, and get behind my spoken words, and you can understand, then you can know what is behind the words. And occasionally he said, it pleases me when you understand what I say. It pleases me even more when you understand without my having to say it. So, my observation, my experience with him was that there was the outer relationship, the outer communication, but there was a silent transmission that occurred. And now and then he would be talking with informally with a group of fellows, and he would be talking about on a certain philosophical theme or explaining a certain method of meditation practice and so on. And even before he finished his explanation, I picked up on what he was driving at, what the conclusion was going to be. And when I did that, he would glance over and smile and keep on talking to the others. I noticed he did that with others too. He could tell when they got it. And he was aware of that. So there is that silent transmission that is there. It is very strengthening. So, but since his passing, outside of a few dreams I've had of him through the years, several dreams, symbolic dreams perhaps, or come out of the subconscious, I have had no direct communication from him, but because of my attunement with that state of consciousness that he represents in the Guru line, it's always strengthening and enlivening when I'm at that place where I'm aware of that transmission of force that flows through the Guru line. But I'm fully aware that each one of us has to be fully spiritually awake. We can't lean on the gurus. We can't expect them to do for us what we can do for ourselves. Master used to say to us, I want you to be as strong as I am. I want you to be like me. Not a copy, of him. But he said, I want you to be as strong as I am. That's the guru's function. The guru's function is to bring out completely the innate potential of the disciple. The gurus don't want people to be following around and worshiping them and leaning on them and being dependent on them. They don't want them to be arrogant and self-righteous either. They want them to be egoless, But still, they want them. Their function is to wake them up, is to help them to realize their own divinity, to become self and God realized. Otherwise, their mission is not successful. That is their function. So the Guru is the one who removes darkness and ignorance and confusion. But the disciple, of course, has the responsibility to participate in the process and do what can be done to be receptive to that awakening and learning experience. Yes, take one more, then we can. All right. Thank you so much. I enjoyed being with you. Wish you well. I'm glad, and especially glad to be with you on this special occasion of celebration in honor of your Guru. And we have beautiful weather, so it's a beautiful weekend. And thank you, Swami.